On this week's full-time roundup, Euros 24's field take shape, Everton learn their punishment, Messi and co. highlight a slate of South American World Cup qualifying. Plus, Danny and Matt talk about a few more general topics during this international break. Full-time roundup starts right now. And welcome into another full-time roundup Sunday show, recap show for you. Of course, myself, Matt Gesslin, joined by my co-host, Danny Brackett here. A little something different for you guys tonight with it being international break. We've been talking about a few topics over the past couple of months, Danny and I, through text message. We've, of course, talked football all the time and wanted to kind of bring a little bit of that to light for you guys here. I know, there's a lot going on, but we don't want to necessarily cover the international scene until we get to some of the more impactful games and tournaments coming up in the summer. So we want to take this break, the last break, heading into, again, the Christmas and holiday period. So we wanted to kind of cover some of those topics that we've been talking about more so this week. So Danny, of course, as always, though, first we got to start with how you're doing. It's a Sunday, gorgeous Sunday, probably one of the most beautiful fall, late November days you'd get here in the QC. I think it was almost 70 degrees, which is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, can't have Sunday scaries, right? When it's this nice outside in late November. I'm completely here for this weather, and I hope it doesn't change. But with Thanksgiving coming around the corner this week, we'll see if the weather changes as well. But hope you're doing well, Matt.
Yeah, and shout out, you mentioned Thanksgiving on Thursday here in America, but there is Thanksgiving in other parts of the world. I believe Canadian Thanksgiving was this week, so shout out to all the folks that celebrate that. Of course, we'll be covering as much as we can, and we'll have an episode on Thursday for you guys previewing the fixtures from the domestic cup coming games. But again, like I said, a little different today. But we do want to start with some football, Danny, because there's been a lot going on in the Euros competition. As I said, qualifications is basically done. This is the last window. Tuesday will be the final games for the European process to be qualified for the teams that will represent in the tournament that will be hosted in Germany this summer. There's a lot going on. 17 teams to date have qualified with some outstanding groups, some big names that are still up in the air as far as whether or not they'll qualify or if they'll have to go to the playoff. Which is, of course, always a crapshoot. You never know what you're going to get there. So you kind of want to make sure that you get your position within the group from the group stage, but there's always an opportunity. So Danny, any major glaring things, there's ways to look at this tournament. Of course, you have your big top favorites. You have the underdogs and the good feel stories that come into play as well. So let's start there. Let's hear. Give me, a couple of your favorites, a couple of your, underdog stories that you're looking forward to, and then maybe try and see of the teams that haven't qualified yet, what would be the biggest storyline if someone does or doesn't make it?
Yeah, so I'll give you three favorites, and most of you all can probably guess the three that I'm talking about right now. You got England with Harry Kane and Jude Bellingham. Arguably two of some of the best, if not the two best players in the world right now on one team. But, England is going to England. As we say, Charlotte's going to Charlotte. So they just can't seem to get across the finish line, but they've been there before in a final. So I back them to do well. Obviously, France, they put up a 14-burger on poor Gibraltar earlier this weekend. Don't know what Gibraltar did to them to deserve that, but they are in rare form, and even if some of the players get injured, they just have people right there to slot in and act like nothing left. And then my third team is going to be Portugal. I like Portugal a lot. They have an insanely good squad. It's really if Roberto Martinez is going to be a fraud or not. And he, from what we've seen in the past, it's definitely possible. And then for my underdog, Belgium really isn't an underdog, so I don't want to pick them. But they look really good under Dominic Tedesco. But I'm gonna say this one's a tough one. I'm gonna say Denmark. I like Denmark a lot, and I like Serbia a lot. Those are the two teams that and Switzerland. I guess I was supposed to name one, but those are the three that I like. How about you, Matt?
Well, I'm glad that Portugal made it in there. I wasn't sure if you were going to waffle on that choice. Of course, we've talked about that. Daniel's shared his love for the Portuguese national team in one of our previous European episodes. So go back and take a listen to that if you're interested in his love for Cristiano Ronaldo and how he thinks he's going to carry Portugal. I'm only giving him a hard time. There's more than that, but I'm glad that they're still in there. Of course, France and England for me as well. Keep an eye out for Belgium, who have looked really good the last couple of weeks in the various windows. Of course, they score 5 today. Romelu Lukaku has a first half hat trick and just continues to score goals. I think he ended up with 14 in the four in the game and 14 for the qualification process. So guys putting in the back of the net. You can't count out teams like Spain, who of course have talent. So I'll take France and England. I think that's everyone's top two. Of course, don't count out Germany, the host. They always have an opportunity, and their expectation as a nation, although they're definitely slacking. And France, England, Spain. Those are my three favorites. And then I liked your pick of Serbia. Serbia's been good. Of course, this is the first time that they'll participate in a major tournament as Serbia independently. Of course, all the turmoil they've had over the years. And that's part of the beauty of the European tournament, I think, is at times of some of these nations that haven't been a part of it because things shift or name changes or independence or forum, things like that. As a sleeper, though, Daniel, I'll take Austria. I think Austria has some sneaky players that are, on that squad that'll give some teams a fearful competition or match. Also, don't sleep on Turkey. I've been pretty big on Turkey a little bit over the years. I think they have a pretty good, talented roster there as well, so they'll be part of that. But one of the bigger things before we move on, because again, we'll focus and we'll hone in more on the Euros as it gets closer in the summer. But it's been a whirlwind of a process with qualification. With that coming to a close, you just want to highlight some of the stories coming out of that. And one of the big stories, Daniel, is again Italy on the ropes, potentially not going to be an automatic qualifier through the group stage, although they are in pole position for that as they head into this match against Ukraine on Monday. They only need a draw. Ukraine has to win. But do you think Italy, who of course won the last edition of this tournament but missed the World Cup, do you think that Italy will qualify? Now, one caveat about qualification for them in the last one that they did win was also through the playoff system. So could they repeat that again, or do you think that they get the point that they need on Monday against Ukraine?
Ukraine's in good form, so it's not going to be a walk in the park. That's for sure. But I do think that they will get it done. They started purring under Spalletti. Obviously, Tonali is going to be a big miss for the qualification and the tournament if they make it with the betting charges. He's probably the best midfielder they have other than Barella. But they have other Italian midfielders who can slot in for them. I like Italy to go through. They could be a sleeper team, but they also won the last Euro, so does that even qualify as a sleeper team? But there's a couple other ones to hit on. Croatia hosts Armenia. If Croatia doesn't miss this tournament, that would be wild, just considering the last decade of dominance they've had in tournaments from the Euros to the World Cup. Czech Republic and Moldova are still alive, as well as Slovakia and Kazakhstan. Is there any hot takes you have for the rest of these qualifications, or Ukraine and Italy?
I do think I agree with you. If Croatia were to miss, it would be a huge story. Of course, the golden generation of Modric and what he brought to the table and Perisic and all those. You can go down the list of players that have been huge across all of Europe over the last couple of years, and of course, running to a semifinal, a final in the World Cup in the last two, and then of course in the Euros getting pretty far as well. So it would be a shocker to me if they're. But of course, golden era has come to an end. It's a small nation. Could you see sustainable, generational, teams like that? Who knows? But that would be the big surprise to me. I think also Slovakia would be a good one, just because they're, a lesser known footballing nation would be interesting. Of course, Kazakhstan as well. Both of them not predominantly known for being heavyweights in the sport, but it would be an interesting dynamic just to see kind of how that could come about and what that would look like for them going forward. Of course, like I said, there are teams that, of that group that you mentioned that are still outstanding. A lot of them could still end up in the tournament with outside shots of the playoff, with Sweden as well. I think with them winning today, they still have an outside shot of advancing into the playoff as a third place team in their group. So a lot of things that can be up for placement still, and it'll be an interesting round of matches on Tuesday to close out the international break. But real quick, Daniel, staying in Europe before we cover another couple topics on qualification and games going around. Staying in Europe, though, we did hear all of a sudden from the FA, from Premier League, that Everton has been docked 10 points, part of an investigation that's been going on around financial fair play and basically accounting practices at the club. And they do get that final 10-point deduction. Of course, Everton has appealed that process. They're looking to potentially have the point reduction reduced down to 8 or ultimately waived altogether. Is this a big deal? Of course, puts them at 4 points, 19th place now on the table. But briefly, is this a major concern for Everton's chances of staying up this year, or just another obstacle that this team has to overcome?
Yeah, I mean, it's a joke, honestly. Just with the whole, if you compare it to the city FFP rules. So, but it is interesting because Everton were charged with one FFP rule and they got 10 points deducted, maybe, a little bit less with litigation. City had 115. So I have no idea how that's going to play out. City were really not a big club before. Was it Saudis? No, Qataris, right? Qataris. Took over the club a while ago, and could we see trophies stripped? Could we see a relegation? Could we see point deduction for several seasons? A transfer ban. It's endless. The opportunities are endless there, and it's a shame that Everton are kind of in this scenario right now. I do think they still survive because I think they have a good enough squad and a good enough coach to kind of dig them out of this hole. But they flirted with relegation a lot the last couple of years, so maybe this is the year. But every point matters, obviously, at this stage, and they just got to pray that 3 other teams around them suck that bad.
Yeah, you mentioned the other 3 teams that are just that poor. Of course, add Bournemouth, so the bottom 4 are really that bad. I still think that they do get what they need. If any of the season is to take the deduction, take it this year. I think people have been saying that left, right, and center. You've also been hearing a lot of issue with the timing of the deduction and how this all unfolded. Of course, if this had happened last year, they wouldn't have made it. They wouldn't have stayed up, and other teams that dropped because of that purpose. I think that argument is a little bit of. I understand where it's coming from, but nothing's going to change. So it's kind of an argument just to hear your own voice a little bit, and to kind of just say that you fought the fight, even though it's never going to change. But it is interesting. And you mentioned City having 115 violations, and of course it's been going on for multiple years. This, I think, at Everton only dates back to 2018. I think is when most of this came out, and City's dates back to like you said, almost 2002 or 3 or 4, in that era when things started to transition over there. So it's a different animal. But we'll see what happens. You never know what the Premier League is going to come down with, and is it a big fine? Of course, Chelsea's part of this as well, having self-reported, though. I think theirs is more of a fine. So yeah, we'll see what happens. But it is interesting to see that some punishments have started to come down, and that some are still kind of outstanding, even though investigations take time, and you look at them over the course of the process, not just in a hot minute.
100%. And the difference between these two things is Everton have a limited amount of funds. They've struggled financially for a while now, so this is no surprise. But them coming out with the news, why now? Why don't you announce this before the season? I always find that pretty odd. But the only thing with City is they have unlimited funds, obviously, and they they're just going to fight this battle for a long, long, long time and kick the can down the road. So we'll see if the Premier League is willing to actually sack up and do something. But it should be something to look out for because obviously all of these players are going to probably jump ship if something were to come down. And one of our followers of the show tweeted out, and he basically compared this to Everton got arrested for like shoplifting, and I threw my own side of what this compares to with City. City like committed like genocide or something. Like it's like, come on, guys, really. So it's pretty annoying that Everton are getting a slap on the wrist and nothing continues to happen to City. But you never know. There's going to be increasing pressure on the powers that be to kind of crack down on City. So we'll see how that works out.
Yeah, it's a story that we'll keep an eye out for. Of course, there's a lot that will transpire here, and there's plenty of great people reporting on all these stories across wherever you listen and wherever you get your news from. In the sports world, we won't touch on that. We're not journalists, but it's just an interesting dynamic to see the difference in way teams are treated and all the plays into it. But we do want to. Not yet.
Not
yeah.
yet.
Well, part of some of the silence is part of that, right? I mean, that is kind of part of some of the prolonging of the punishment. But again, we'll see what happens. But wanting to keep things on the field, like I mentioned, there's some qualification for the World Cup, Daniel. As if teams are really going to need that at some point, given how big of a field we're going to have and where it's going to take place. And we can get into that again more along the lines of a different time, different place, with Saudis, I believe, confirming to be the host for 2034 since we last spoke about it. So it does look like that tournament has been awarded. And of course, we all knew that was coming with the way that things were set up for CONMEBOL to host 3 games and then the tournament shifting and being set up in Africa and Europe. So, but there, like I said, some games will be played in South America, which is where we saw some of the best games of the weekend, Daniel. I'm not sure if you saw Argentina versus Uruguay the other day, which was an absolute classic, one of the fiercest rivalries in South America, of course, as well. Played at the Bombonera, which was absolutely rocking in Buenos Aires, and the game delivered intensity-wise, but the fans went home disappointed as Uruguay got the surprising result, Daniel, 2-0. First time that Argentina, or second game in 52 games, I believe, that Argentina have lost. Any takeaways from this, or what was just your general thought? I thoroughly enjoyed watching this from start to finish. I could watch more of this week in, week out.
Do not sleep on Bielsa ball. And I mean, he's a brilliant manager. We've seen managers from all walks of life, chime in about their thoughts on how good of a coach Marcelo Bielsa is. He hasn't gotten the accolades needed to be arguably one of the best coaches of all time, but his practices have been copied and followed, and he has a lot of disciples. So it's good to see. Uruguay is the perfect team to set up in that Bielsa ball mentality. I mean, Darwin Nunez he's really helped Darwin Nunez become a better player. Honestly, probably has developed him more than Jurgen Klopp has, which is like kind of, I guess, a hot take, but I don't know. I love CONMEBOL. It's so fun. It gets really intense. I feel like Euro's a lot more. Everyone's kind of settled down, but like,
yeah, it's a little bit less formal in South America, and in Europe, it's very much like we're going through the process. This is just how we have to do things. But in South America, it's very, very much, I still want to murder your children type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, we got Ugarte talking shit to DePaul about Messi, like. It's so funny.
Messi choking somebody. I mean, there was you could feel it. The tension that was in the stadium and the fans were into it. There's something about, Latin America and football that's just, it feels a little different. Not just in South America, but of course, Central America, the same feeling when you play some of those big matchups in Mexico and in other nations. So like, it's just I would love to get down there for a match and watch, one of the big classicos down there would be fantastic. I've heard stories where the away fans have to stay in the stands for 45 minutes to make sure that they can get home safe. Like just stuff that you don't really hear about in anywhere other any other part of the world. And of course, some of the most beautiful football you'll ever see. You mentioned Uruguay and just how good of a fit Bielsa is for them. On the flip side, Danny, there is real trouble brewing in Brazil. They do not have a manager that fits their style of play right now. They lose to Colombia, of course, a great story. David Luiz getting both goals in this one. Of course, his father in attendance after just being released from being a hostage from guerrillas. So that, motion pouring and in that stadium as well. But the bigger story, I think, from on the field is that Brazil lose again, and they also lose one of their key players. Daniel Vinicius Jr. goes down with a hamstring injury that it sounds like is pretty serious for him.
Yeah, no, it's going to be really interesting. And we mentioned Carlo Ancelotti is gonna eventually take over this team, so he'll have maybe a little bit of a bigger hole to climb out of. But I feel like when you got such a talented squad like Brazil, I feel like it wouldn't be that hard, to get them clicking. You kind of just say, all right, lads, go do your thing out there. But they are not playing good right now. So, they're missing Neymar, obviously, which is they've been their captain for however long. So that's probably understated miss. But it'll be really interesting to see once. I mean, are they going to fire this coach and get like an interim to kind of like bridge them to Carlo Ancelotti? We'll see, and we'll probably have a better knowledge of that next international window. But very surprising from Brazil.
Yeah, you mentioned the manager if he gets sacked. Of course, they play a pretty big matchup on Tuesday night, which I will thoroughly be waiting and enjoying salivating to watch. Brazil, Argentina, in Maracanã. I mean, how much bigger can you get? And that's going to be a fantastic match. Brazil currently sit 5th in the table. Of course, 6 automatic qualifiers in CONMEBOL. Argentina sit atop the table. So this is going to be, could Argentina wipe the floor with Brazil is the question. Daniel, and then from that point, questions really do ask. But I still feel comfortable. I think Brazil, of course, is going to qualify ultimately in the end. It's just one of those times where you expect them to be first the entire way, and maybe they come second, or they get first in the last window. But I still think they're comfortable. But Carlo Ancelotti will be a huge, turnaround when that happens. If that happens, there's been rumors of him maybe changing of heart and not actually taking the job. So we'll see what happens there. But of course, Daniel, one of the things that you and I have talked about before, and we actually brought it up last episode briefly, is just the quality of a manager and how important that is. You've alluded to a couple of really, important managers in the game as well here with Carlo Ancelotti, who, for my money, is the most recognized, is the greatest manager maybe of all time. The way what he's achieved and where he's done it everywhere. He's won it in every league. He's won Champions League. He's won basically everything except for at the international stage, which is why I think this Brazil job interests him. But who right now in the game, and we could talk about it as domestic or even broader international as well,
anyone,
are the top 5 managers in the sport right now, in your opinion?
All right. And this will be, ranked, but just know, obviously, the top 5, it's pretty damn close, right? So, number 1 for me is, and I hate to say it, Pep Guardiola. Number 2, Jurgen Klopp. Number 3, Carlo Ancelotti. Like you mentioned, just so many accolades, and he's an older manager too, and he's adapted the entire way. So crazy stuff. And number 4, I'm gonna go with Xabi Alonso. I love him so much, and it is a very small sample size, but what he's doing right now at Leverkusen can't be understated. And I guess we'll really see once he gets a big job, but I'm very bullish on his future. And then number 5, gosh, this is so tough. Probably Thomas Tuchel, honestly. He's a very good tactical manager. He's won everywhere he's gone. And I can't really fault him for, I'm trying to think if there's anyone I missed, but I feel like that's a solid top 5.
That is a solid top 5. I do appreciate and respect that you went all domestic club managers, and that I will have a few international managers in mind. I do believe Pep Guardiola, though, is the best manager in the world, no matter what. Of course, unlimited resources, best players, however you want to define that. He still does it, and he builds teams, and they win, and that's all he does. He wins everywhere he goes. He's done it, and that won't continue to change anywhere he does go in the future. Jurgen Klopp, I definitely agree with you, is up there, one of the better minds in the game. Just the way he can get teams positioned, the passion he manages with, and the way that his players feed off of that. We've talked about that when you guys had that big win earlier in the year, that Liverpool moment. That comes from him, that mentality and just that approach, and that passion comes from him. This is kind of where I change a little bit. I'm going to go Didier Deschamps, French national team manager.
That's
of course.
A fair one.
A World Cup winner, finalist, then the following World Cup. Of course, in the Euros, a little disappointing, but still made a decent run. And so you can't really diminish the credit that he's taken there. Carlo Ancelotti for me as well, 4. And again, these guys can all be interchanged between 1 and 5. So just take that for what it's worth. We mentioned about it, though. He's won every top league in Europe. And some multiple times. He's won the Champions League multiple times. Everything you can be, Copa del Rey or whatever domestic cup he was in at that nation, he's won. And then number 5 for me is the reigning World Cup champion. And again, their record has spoken for themselves of late. Lionel Scaloni from Argentina. So
Wow.
There's a lot of good managers out there. Well, I mean, you don't see a lot of the international guys much, right? It's not as common or in the spotlight as domestic because they're not playing all the time. But you look at Argentina's record under him, and of course they don't lose very often, and he's won a World Cup in the last calendar year. So hard to throw that guy at the water. So I'll take those 5 any day of the week. But I do respect your 5 as well. I think they're all that we could have made this list 20 names, 30 names. There's so many great managers out there, men, women. On the women's side, there's some great managers as well that we could have touched on, and then more coming up the ranks. So it's an awesome time to be having a discussion of who's the best managers. That those ultimately dictate and drive the teams that we watch. So it's good. It's always good to see more fun, exciting football coming in through the ranks.
I actually really like the Didier Deschamps pick. I do have to agree with him. He might edge out Thomas Tuchel now that you mention it. But I'll keep Thomas Tuchel in there. But I did like what you had to say about both Scaloni and Didier Deschamps. Now, let's switch to best players right now. I'll let you go first because you got the hot hand right now. You don't have to do them in order, but your top 5.
Yeah, not in order. That's too difficult. That would be too difficult. I mean, you got to put Kylian Mbappe in the list, Erling Haaland in the list. I mean, basically the Ballon d'Or list right now is the best players in the world, right? For argue's sake. But Jude Bellingham for me is in there right now, just what he's been doing, playing out of his mind. Of course, Lionel Messi continues to deliver both domestically and then, of course, maybe lesser league now at MLS, but he still has it. You can still see it. He's probably 5. If I have to keep a permanent place, I'd probably stick him at 5. So what do I have? 1 left. Man, it's tough because there's Harry Kane. I mean, how can you leave him out? So that's my top 5 players right now. What I say, Kylian Mbappe, Harry Kane, Messi, Jude. Do I need one more?
In Holland.
And Holland, yeah, I'll take those 5. You could throw in Antoine Griezmann as well in there for me too, but those are my 5.
I'm gonna try to be a little bit different from you, but it's hard to,
It's hard because it's the best players in the world, right? It's
I'm gonna go obviously Mbappe, Jude, Kane, Griezmann. And for my 5th player, I'm going to have to do a homer pick here, Mohamed Salah. He's just how he just adapts year in, year out, and just continues to just pump goals in and assists. And I mean, I feel like it hasn't been like an amazing season for him. And he still has so many goal contributions. That's just how good he is. And I feel like when you're a player like Messi and these players who just score all the time, these ridiculous numbers just become normalized and they're not appreciated as much. So I wanted to throw Mohamed Salah in. But you could also, throw in my honorable mention would be like probably Leroy Sané. He's been fantastic.
Yeah, there's just so many names, and Mohamed Salah continues to deliver again for Liverpool this year. How can you really take him away from that? And he delivered as well for Egypt, having a hat trick, I think I saw the other day. So just continues to deliver both home and abroad. The one thing though, Daniel, I wanted to touch on before we wrap up here, it's a little bit shorter episode tonight, but one topic that I do want to get your thoughts on, and is a nice segue from the top players, because unfortunately none of those players were listed that we mentioned were U.S. born players. And I want to take a few minutes to just chat. I know we've briefly touched on this, but with the international break going on, we saw the U.S. play Trinidad and Tobago on Thursday, and have a difficult time. Was it Thursday or Friday? Have a difficult time breaking them down. Thursday. Did ultimately get the win, a 3-0 win. They play the second leg on Monday down in Trinidad. Basically, the team that, if we advance, we get an automatic berth into Copa America tournament, which will be next summer, hosted in the United States as well. But I think, Daniel, there's a bigger conversation that needs to be had with the men's national team. We talked about it when Greg Berhalter came back and took over that job, and we wanted to see some things that I don't know if we have yet. I still think that this team has a lot of growing up to do, whether that's coach related or not. There's still steps that we have to take as a footballing nation to get to where we want to go. I think we're much better placed than we were 10, 15, 20 years ago. Some of the most talented kids in the pool that we have ever seen, but they aren't really taking that next step and shining in the global stage yet, like some of these other youngsters are, and being those, and it's hard because that's not how the first thought is in our nation, to be a Jude Bellingham or the future Messi or the future Kylian Mbappe. But until the United States can produce players of that quality, I still think they will always be in that second tier of players against the bigger countries that we strive to be, and ultimately to be sitting at that table. I don't think that the United States, although ranked 10th or top 10 in the world, belongs at that top 10 seat, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, and it was a very interesting. I mean, we still have the second leg, so there's still conclusions we can derive from at the end of the break. But with some key injuries, especially Christian Pulisic and Tim Weah,
no doubt.
That's our two starting wingers, right? So it's like, okay, who is going to step up here? Who's, because I feel like it's pretty shady at the winger, and we lack depth there. That's probably the position we lack depth probably the most. And you see Greg start Kevin Paredes, who's started flourishing a little bit at Wolfsburg, and then you saw Malik Tillman on the other side, who's had a fantastic season so far with PSV, and neither really took their chance, honestly. But the whole issue I had with the Trinidad and Tobago game was, with lacking wingers, obviously you want to give players a shot, but you could have mixed up the formation. Like, Greg is a one-trick pony, in my opinion. He can only play his 4-3-3 system, and that's all. And when you want to challenge in tournaments, you got to be tactically flexible. And like, players are going to drop down, and it's not always just plug and play. So I would like to see a 3-5-2 with more wingback style, and Pepe and Balogun up top. But I don't think it's a coincidence that Malik Tillman has been on fire for PSV, and then he comes to the national team, plays out of position, and puts a stinker performance. I don't think that's a coincidence. I mean, maybe the spotlight got to him, but it's Trinidad and Tobago. Like, he should be just destroying these guys. And I just think that Greg is holding this team back, like we've had this conversation a million times. So it'll be interesting. I think it's really annoying how we played 10 men for, 45 minutes and waited to the 82nd minute to score a first goal. Obviously, it's kind of a race because we end up putting two more in the back of the net, and it finishes 3-0. But this should have been 7, 8, like disrespectful score lines. And we're at home, for God's sake. So not satisfied with the result, not happy with how he played, not happy with Greg. Balogun continues to not play very well. I think Pepe should get the start. In this reverse fixture, maybe that's a hot take. I don't think it is. But I'd like to see Greg flex his tactical muscles if he has any and try something new.
Yeah, I'm getting very concerned that Greg doesn't have tactical um, skills and also doesn't necessarily have the best managerial skills. We saw, of course, getting a little dust up with Florian Balogun at one point in the last window on the sideline at halftime. You mentioned, does that kind of take away some of what he's been offering and showing on the field? And Ricardo Pepe has something to prove, of course, without being on that World Cup roster by Greg, and has come in and just continues to score goals when he gets a chance to play. So yeah, I don't think that's a huge shout. I think it's a mismanagement of talent. I think you're looking at a bigger picture from Greg's perspective, is he's not molding these young guys to be what they could be and getting the best out of them. And that's concerning, because like I said at the beginning of this conversation, we're not producing raw talented players that are going to take over the world of football. And so we need development. We need either at the national rank or collegiate rank or youth rank to have better management of players and talent and getting them to be ready to. I mean, look, the whole argument is, I watched the US versus France U17 World Cup match on Saturday, and there was not one player on either team that really flashed at me. Now, granted, that's U17 versus U15 kids, and you're.
But Fortunas, I guess he didn't play really.
He didn't play. He kind of came on the bench. But my point is, Zaire Emery is 17 years old and just bypasses this tournament and is dominating at PSG. And when he plays for the national team, the men's senior squad, he scores. So why and when are we going to start producing 17-year-olds that are ready to do exactly that? You look at Lamine Yamal for Spain as well with Barcelona. Not a small club. He's not just going in and learning the ropes and the chops. He's at 16, 17 years old. He's going into the biggest club team in the world and shining. Like, it's time for our youth team system to start producing talent like that. And I think my point is, until we don't get that, then we're going to be struggling with teams like Trinidad and Tobago and the rest of CONCACAF. And then when we go to big tournaments, we'll get out of the group stage because we have the talent to do that. No doubt about that. But the ceiling, there is a ceiling for this squad is where I'm worried about. And I think there's, we need to take a step as a federation to get stronger and be more assertive in the sport if we really want to do this the right way. And, a lot of people are saying, 2026, we got to get to the semifinal or the final. I think it's a rude awakening if you look at this roster and how this team is played.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said there are levels to this, right? In America, there's soccer's probably fourth, fifth on the sports chart.
No doubt.
Maybe not even top five. Some would argue. I would argue it's becoming a top five, if not. But there are signs. I think that European clubs who are starting to put up academies in the U.S. and start snatching talent up and having them come abroad at a young age, like Christian Pulisic, and that happened to him. So the openness and development of that is exciting, because the more we have, which sucks to say, but the more Americans we have developing in Europe under the good football principles, the better we are. So it's a top-down approach in how we teach young kids about football, but we have such a cool opportunity in next year with Copa America and in the World Cup. Soccer fever is going to be a thing. MLS is growing. So obviously, I don't think we're going to have a Lamine Yamal or Zaire Emery just like magically appear. I think that takes hundreds of years to get there, and we are very behind everyone else. But we've rapidly improved while we have had national team, and so I am positive for the future. Now, I'm not going to tell you that we're going to make it to the semifinals in the World Cup, because I don't think we are. But I think this is such a good opportunity for us to grow and understand. And hey, this is the benchmark, right? France doesn't have to be the benchmark. Like a Dutch team, an Italian team who is frisky can be the benchmark, right? So we gotta just change how we think, how we develop, and I don't know. I think we'll get there one day. Me and you might not be alive to see that, but I think one day we will get there.
Yeah, and I completely echo your sentiment. Again, this is the most talented, and we're developing, and it's improving year over year. You see it, very quickly, but would love to see it just selfishly improve faster. 330 million people. There's got to be 11 people out there that can play this sport at that highest level, and at some point that'll happen, and I hope that's the case in our lifetime. Contrary to what you said, and probably a little bit of belief in that myself. But Daniel, like I said, we wanted to touch on things for the folks, the listeners, but also we love doing this for ourselves. And some of these are the conversations that we have on a daily basis with each other. And with it being an international break, I thought it was a good time to talk about some of these topics versus just honing in on X's and O's and score lines and stats and games that we don't necessarily see as important as the weekly fixtures in the domestic league. And then, like I said, of course, what these qualifications and tournaments lead into is very important. And we will cover them in the process and proper time that they need in June, as well as qualifying for World Cup as it gets closer. But again, if you've listened this far, we really appreciate it. I wanted to change it up a little bit different for you guys, but that doesn't mean that we cannot hear from you and listen to what you guys want to hear us say and talk about. You can follow us and interact and be part of the conversation on X at Full-Time Roundup. You can interact with Danny directly at Liverpool CLTFC. You can reach out to me at Life of Gesslin on X. And of course, download, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a 5-star rating. It goes a long way. And we will see you in the next roundup.